Hi there, and welcome to the Couples Expert Podcast. This is Stuart Fensterheim, the Couples Expert. Today is Sunday, and I am so excited to be here to talk with you today about having a loving and authentic relationship with your partner. I bring these podcasts to you hoping that you'll get some insight and some help and ideas for making the relationship with your partner absolutely special. Thank you for listening, and I hope that today's show, not only will you find it interesting, but also informative and give you a deeper understanding of who you are as an individual, but more importantly, how to have that close connected relationship with the one person in the world that you love the most, that you're building a life with. I want to talk about this week. My wife and I just had a blast giving out candy to the trick-or-treaters in our neighborhood. I was dressed as Dracula, and I'm going to have a photo of me in my outfit, and my wife was a witch. I guess it may be more of a reflection of our true personalities because, they say that counselors could be bloodsuckers, and who else but a bloodsucker would be married to a witch? Still, it was really fun for us to connect with my beautiful witch and listen to the music of the sounds. We tried to play some scary things. And we got a skeleton of our dog, Ollie, and he and another dog skeleton. So we had a lot of spooky kind of stuff in the neighborhood. I also want to mention that this past weekend, my wife and I attended a fundraiser. It's called Cork and Collars for Desert Lab Retriever Rescue. It's a cause that she and I support, and we're fosters, and we also donate to them every year, and this is their annual fundraiser. And what's sort of cool about the organization is that it has saved to date over 2,500 labs that were on the kill list. And last year alone, they rescued and rehabilitated and rehomed 224 labs to new families. On my Facebook page, The Couples Expert, you'll see photos of me and my wife at the fundraiser. We had wine and treats, good music, and every year. And we actually won a silent auction, and we got a bunch of dog stuff for him. But if you're interested at all in that organization, and I encourage you to check them out, go to desertlabrescue.org. Before we move on, I want to just make sure all of you are aware that we do show notes every week, and the show notes is on the website, www.thecouplesexperts.com, and that we also have a YouTube channel. The Couples Expert YouTube channel contains videos on a variety of topics. I try to do at least one a day. I'm now at about 190 videos. And I really encourage all of you to check it out. It's sort of my way of giving back and really having these quick, brief videos, sharing every single day what you can do to make your relationship really special. So if you go to the YouTube and search for the Couples Expert YouTube channel, it'll take you right there, but I'll also have a link on the show notes. The other thing I wanted to mention is that I'm really excited to announce that I'm finally working on the finishing touches of a 4-part video series that I'll be launching early next year. It's been a long time coming. I've been thinking about it. I love doing my daily videos, and this is sort of my way of really putting together in a very concise way 4 videos that would really help you go from that feeling of disconnection to connection and really understand what gets in the way, number one, how to deal with the triggers that come up, and how to really keep that love life and passion alive, and how do you establish a relationship that's going to last forever. So stay tuned for more information on that. It should be coming out pretty soon. You'll see it in social media. But let's get to today's show. Today's show is a show on substance abuse and impact on relationships. There's a lot of variables in play when it comes to substance abuse. It changes the personalities, perceptions of someone, and if you love someone deeply and they get caught up in this, you might not even recognize them. The partners could change so dramatically and have mood swings that there really isn't a more devastating experience than looking at a partner and going, I don't recognize who this is. How do we deal with these changes and the addiction and, some of the things that are going on in the news about substances. And it's really a tough topic. I don't think there's anyone listening who hasn't been impacted by substance abuse in some way, either in your life or the life of someone that you care about. Alcoholism and addictions are really woven throughout our families, and some of you may even be having multiple generations of your family involved in substance abuse. You might be a spouse of an addict or a person who's struggling yourself with addiction. It might be one of your kids. And I think that's even almost a worse pain, to really feel so helpless. So no matter who that person is, there's such a huge impact on the family. Substance abuse can destroy relationships and entire families. But how do we deal with it? That's why I've brought Robert Cox on, because I really would like to have a discussion on what do we do, how do we help those, and more importantly, how do you help yourself if the partner isn't interested in getting help? But what we do know is self-care and really coping with is not an option. It's a have to. What we want to do is preserve that relationship. So, Robert, thank you for joining us. And I really would like to hear a lot about the variables that come into play. What do we do when the addicts become obsessed with their addiction, and the factors that are there? So, folks of my Couples Expert audience, let me tell you a little bit about him. Robert is a mental health counselor specializing in trauma, addiction, and autism. I'm happy to have Robert with me today because he's going to give us tremendous amount of information that we can use today to help your relationship. He's nationally certified counselor and a professional counselor in Missouri. Missouri and Arizona, different weather, that's for damn sure, because we just hit 100.
Oh, my God.
As the latest time in Arizona history to hit 100 degrees. He's a recovering substance abuse person, which gives him really a depth of understanding on the issues, and he has a unique way of helping and having a perspective that you guys will really benefit from. So, Robert, I want to welcome you to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on, Stuart. I appreciate it.
I was thinking about a quote before we get started, and I like to, every time we do these podcasts, to start with some sort of quote. And it's a Hawaiian word called ohana. The concept of ohana means family. Family means nobody gets left behind or forgotten. No matter how far into the abuse your loved one goes, they're not left behind, they're not forgotten. You love them even with it. Now, that doesn't mean that you necessarily can be involved, but the love is still there. It's almost like a tough love in setting boundaries, but they will always know that you love them and that when they make the choice to go into recovery, you'll be there to support them and encourage them. So, I guess I'd like you to start, Robert, by sort of giving me your perspective on that quote.
I think it's often forgotten. And the reason that it gets forgotten is because it feels so much like betrayal when someone relapses in the context of a relationship. More so even if it's a sexual addiction. But even if it's just, if it's alcohol or drugs or whatever it is, that relapse almost always involves lying to my partner about what I'm doing because I'm afraid of the consequences. And so it becomes very, very easy for the partner to forget that this is a family, no one left behind rule. That doesn't mean, and part of my work is kind of teaching both of them how to have boundaries, right, within the relationship, so that we can learn to trust, because that vulnerability, that the trust gets broken, and then there's this very vulnerable space that you're asking people to embrace again. And part of doing that is learning to be able to say, I love you no matter what, but I'm not going to help you go down that rabbit hole with your addiction anymore. This is the parent who is constantly handing $100 to their son who's an IV heroin user and we just kind of ignore the fact that it might end up there, probably will, right? We can say no with love. We don't have to leave them behind because we have boundaries. And I think that's the real kind of very razor's edge dance that we have to start doing if everybody's going to recover, because addiction's not a disease of one person. It's a family disease almost always.
That's really a great perspective. You know, what comes up for me is I'm thinking about, one of the things we know is one of the expertise addicts have is an expertise in manipulation and twisting facts.
Oh, man.
It's really like if they could put that on a resume somewhere, they could earn millions and millions of dollars.
I would be easily in 8 figures. I remember one time in my own recovery when I was first getting, I'd been clean several years at this time, but my family was coming to terms with, and I was talking with my father, and he said, "You've always been this like really super intelligent, brilliant person. I don't understand how you could be an addict." And I said, that made it easier, that made it easier for me to be an addict because I was very good at knowing exactly what you wanted to hear and being able to manipulate you in a way that was going to allow me to get what I wanted, And so, yeah, that's one of the core skills. Now, on the flip side, there are a lot of skills I learned as an addict that I use as a therapist. I just use them in a healthy way, And so I know how to say what my client needs to hear at times, right? But now and to some extent, that's an asset that addicts can begin using in a positive way in their relationships, because they really do know on some emotional level what their partner needs or wants emotionally. Because most of us come from environments where it is to our benefit to be able to read people emotionally in order to protect ourselves, right? And so we begin using that skill and that talent to predict what the other person needs from me, where they might need support. It does 2 things. A, it shows my partner that I'm willing to support them. And B, it puts me squarely outside of myself. And that is antithetical to addiction, right?
Mm-hmm.
Addiction is always about being wrapped up in myself and what I need.
And I think people forget, I looked up once the word manipulation. And what I found is intent has a lot to do with whether it's negative or positive. If your manipulation is to manipulate someone to get into a recovery program because by doing that, their life will be better the rest of their life, is that negative? No.
I think it really comes down to, is this self-focused or other-focused?
Right. Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. And what's interesting is when we start looking at this in the family dynamics, and this is the piece that I was going with it, is what I see so often in my office are sometimes having, the parents of a child who's caught up in this. And what happens is they give that $100, not so much because they think they should, but because if what they hear from the addict is, if you don't give it to me, I'm going down to Van Buren, which is one of our worst streets at night, and I'm going to get my stuff there, and who knows what I'll get. So they hand them the money, not because they want to, but they don't want to see their son lying with a needle in his arm. Right. And how do you help those families? That to me is a really tough one.
It comes down to boundaries. I cannot. I say to my clients all the time, so much so that my wife's heard it so often, she bought me a lamp with a little monkey at the base of a tree, because I tell people all the time, those aren't your monkeys, right? That's not your problem. Mm-hmm. And so, and while it is your problem in that, if my son or my spouse goes and gets bad stuff on the street and dies, then that hurts. But the bottom line is that was a choice they made and not one you made. And when you hand him $100 for whatever reason, that's a choice you make that contributes directly to their addiction. And so the only thing we can be responsible for is our own choices. You cannot stop. If he is intent on killing himself, you cannot stop that. There's nothing you can do. What you can do is structure the environment around him so that the odds are in his favor, right? But he's going to have to make that final choice. He can walk away from that environment if he chooses to. But you don't have to be responsible for keeping the sickness going. You have to pull your piece of it out, right?
That's such a good sort of way of putting it, and I sort of like that because part of what I've done is I say, okay, your son comes to you and says, I want a gun. I'm going into the neighborhood police station, and I'm going to kill the police. I'm going to go in there, I'm going to shoot them up, I'm going to kill as many as I can. Would you hand them the gun? But he'll say he'll go down the street, he'll buy it from this bad guy. Would you give him the gun? Of course you wouldn't. And it's really not that different.
Right. Yeah. All you can do, there's a story about Leo Tolstoy who sold all of his possessions and gave everything he had to the poor, and it didn't solve the problem. And he got very depressed. And eventually the conclusion he came to was that all I can do is add my light to the sum of light and hope for the best. And that's where we're at. Just, don't be a part of the problem, be a part of the solution. And he's going to have to make the final choice. And at that point, it's just hope and prayer.
Right. The timing of this podcast, it'll be released this Thursday, which is, I think, the 3rd, I believe. May not be. But one of the things on the Arizona ballot is the question of legalization of recreational marijuana. And as a substance abuse counselor, I would love to hear, and I'm not asking you to tell me what your position is as what you're going to vote. I don't even know in Missouri if it's on the ballot, but
yeah, not yet, but it probably will be.
Do you have a perspective as a substance abuse counselor about that?
I am in favor of legalization for a lot of reasons. Mostly I'm in favor of decriminalization.
Yeah.
Aside from the economic benefit everyone says can be had that is still to be determined from taxation and these issues. Look, alcohol is legal. It's still a huge problem, right? So what I want to see us do is we don't help the situation by putting predominantly men of color in prison for having a blunt in their car, right? What does help the situation is when we start to see this as a disease. And if we look at this as a disease, we're not about to start jailing people with diabetes.
Right.
Right. And so where there are nonviolent crimes involved that involve drugs, there's a ton of research out there about criminal courts and how they work.
And that is not equal.
Yeah. Currently in states like Missouri where they have drug courts, it's basically a 3 strikes and you're out kind of deal. The first time you come before the drug court, you're sentenced to rehab. If you fail or you complete the program and then you commit another drug-based nonviolent crime, you're sent to rehab again. You get 3 chances and then it's jail. That's been a pretty effective system in California and New Mexico and here in Missouri, in that it saves the state about $25,000 a year per individual. That's kind of an average figure, putting them through rehab instead of putting them through prison. And there are a lot of, political reasons I think we keep incarcerating people for drugs. But fundamentally, I'm in favor of the legalization of it because realistically, you're not going to stop the flow, right? You're just not. There's always going to be a demand because there will always be addicts. The question is, what can we do to help the healing? And I don't think prison helps with that situation.
And what it does, I think, is opens up dialogue. So whether it passes or fails is almost irrelevant because I think the dialogue is what's been missing, which is let's talk about what do we really need to do to heal the families. There's so much of this and no one knows what to do. They sort of throw their hands up. I think the police do. I think everyone does, and says, well, we're stuck with this and we'll always be here.
I mean, we know what works. I politically believe there are a lot of reasons that we're not doing that, but we know what works. Look at the tobacco industry, how the use among adolescents of cigarettes has drastically reversed over the past 20 years. Why? Because we instituted a program of public education. We made it socially unacceptable. We pounded into kids' brains the health problems that would be created by this. Education, information dissemination is the key. And we're not doing that with drugs. We're just saying, just say no, drugs bad, and that's not going to cut it,
I laugh a lot because when you're talking about tobacco and then we talk about marijuana, what people, I don't think even now it's being talked about, is what is the impact on the body to take as deep a breath as possible, hold the smoke in your lungs as long as possible, and what about the health reasons, and then what about sterilization, and what about all of these things? No one talks about those things.
Right. And I think that needs to be a part of the discussion. Well, and one of the hazards of legalization that we're going to have to get past, and I think it'll be this way initially, and then we'll turn the corner, is you get a lot of this disinformation out of the drug culture and people who stand to make serious money off of the legalization, right? So there's a lot of this misinformation about the health benefits of marijuana. If you read some of these blogs or, of people who are pushing this industry, marijuana cures everything now. Just right. every human ailment would just disappear if we legalized it,
That's right. But I got a headache. Smoke a joint.
Right. And, and you could be wearing marijuana clothes right now if we would just legalize it, ignoring the fact that it'd probably be a little itchy, but that's the hazard. And we're going to run into that initially.
And I think where that leads me in sort of my next question for you isn't so much from this sort of political question, but in terms of relationships, what do you see as, how do you go from a substance abuse treatment perspective? How do you go from a couple that is with someone where they truly see in front of their face almost every single day that you can't count on them? And how do you reverse that?
Well, and we were talking earlier when we were recording an episode for my show, that really it's about, you have to have some clean time in before we start to work on the relationship issues. Mm-hmm. For several reasons. One reason, there's that old biblical statement, you cannot serve two masters, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're active in your addiction, that's it. That's your master, right? That's what you've put your focus in, or you're going to because you have to. And so the relationship you can't really focus on. So we need a period of clean time first. And then we can start building on the trust, which comes slowly. I deal with a lot, especially I have several patients right now who are in their early 20s and have been relying heavily on mom and dad. Initially, when they get clean, I hear a lot in my office, why do they always have to focus on my mistakes of the past? Well, because that's where their fear is. That's why, and you need to own your responsibility in that and understand that they're going to try as long as they see you trying, but they're also going to be overbearing and want to watch every minute and be very strict with you in some ways because they're terrified.
Right.
It's because they love you that they see the mistakes of the past because they're terrified about their own futures. And so we really kind of try, and part of that is getting the other individual to perspective take, right? As addicts, mm-hmm. we're not big on taking the perspective of others. Mm-hmm. We're pretty wrapped up in what our needs are. And so that really for me is the beginning, is let's start looking at what their perspective is and how it is going to be hard for them to trust for a while, and how can we build space for that. A lot of what I teach is mindfulness, learning to be able to just sit with those emotional spaces without having to react to them. And what that looks like is, especially in couples, and sometimes I will encourage couples to meditate together, and one of them is trying to hold the space where they feel judgment coming from their partner because of their mistakes. And the other one I have trying to hold that vulnerability space where I understand they've made mistakes in the past, but we're trying to start over here, right? I'm not a big, we're starting over with a clean slate person. We have to clean the slate first, and then we can start with the clean slate, right? But we have to really be able to sit with that vulnerability and not react to it without thinking, right?
What you're really defining is, from an attachment model perspective, because my audience is familiar with that, is repairing the relationship and then moving into creating something you've never had.
Exactly.
And I think so many people forget that. I liked your analogy when you were talking about the master is the addiction. It really isn't that different than if you're talking about an infidelity. If you're having an affair with someone and trying to work on your relationship, it'd never happen. You have to have these, cross connections don't happen. So if you have any connection with anything that's stronger than your partner, we got to clean that up.
Right, exactly. And there needs, the really hard thing is getting the partner to create that holding space and switching their mindset from reacting to what the addict is doing to acting in the relationship to encourage the new behavior.
Right. And if you think of it as a relationship injury, and I talk a lot about that, if you say to the kids especially, that the addiction is an injury in this relationship, and until we repair that injury, they won't trust. But once we start doing that, the trust begins to come slower.
I like that imagery. I think I'm going to steal that, actually.
Sure, go ahead. I give you permission.
Okay.
I won't sue you.
Yeah.
Robert, I really appreciate you coming. We sort of got off a little bit off tangent with the legalization, but the timing is so wonderful. And I think the whole concept of how powerful a addiction, and it really doesn't even matter the kind, whether it's alcohol, gambling, food, sex, it really has a way of just taking over. It really is so powerful. Do you have any specific advice or something you could suggest to couples who are caught up in this to try to make it less powerful?
Well, this is one of the things I talk a lot about in my podcast, not from a couple's perspective, but it's really the same. And that's trying to become the observer of situations rather than reactor to them, which means learning to sit with that space and not have to react out of it immediately. Creating that little extra breath where I can decide how I want to act on my environment instead of reacting to it is the most important thing I think we can do. That we just, God, we're in such a hurried society anymore, and just that how important it is to, okay, my husband's been gone an hour longer than he said he was going to be gone. I'm going to take a few extra breaths and kind of really sit with that and decide how I want to act instead of just reacting knee-jerk to those, broken bonds, those wounds inside of me that keep the pattern going.
We're just about out of time here. And one of the things before we end, I have a couple of questions, but one of the things you shared with me is you have another passion that you're involved with, which has to do with autism. And I wondered if you wanted to sort of talk a little bit about that, because I want my audience, to know that you're a resource in both that area as well as the area of addiction. So could you share a little bit about that?
Yeah. And, along the lines of autism and relationship, first, I view autism differently than a lot of people in the field do. And that's where the majority of my work has been over the past several years. I've been dealing with autism for about 20 years, all the way from being a direct care staff to being a case manager in the field to being now a therapist for individuals and families. One of the big myths that I hear is that people with autism, they don't have empathy. That's not true. They have difficulty at times because their mirror neurons don't work so well with perspective taking, understanding where you're coming from. But that's a learned skill in a lot of ways. That's different than not having empathy. And so often my relationship work with individuals with autism exactly what we've been talking about in trying to teach them to trust, because they have been so repeatedly wounded through bullying or through environmental trauma because of the sensory issues. But those wounds have created a real inability at times to trust. So a lot of times it's not that I can't bond with people. It's just that that's not been a really enjoyable experience in the past, and I'm no longer willing to risk that space with people, especially in high functioning individuals. The most painful place you can be with a disability is just functional enough to know where you're not functioning like everyone else. And that's a very, very uncomfortable space. So a lot of my work with them is embracing that space, and the same thing, learning to slow down and breathe through those vulnerable moments and risk relationship.
And to recognize that, because my experience with the clients that I've seen who have that is that if you work slow enough and if you work hard at establishing a safe relationship where they know they can count on you, they are actually very warm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it is about the lack of trust to feeling like, I don't want to be hurt again.
Absolutely. And that's where, in my adult groups, we form a lot of relationships. Young adults, I do groups for 17 to 25. And over and over again, what they want to focus on is the bullying that they encountered in high school and the social trauma that it's not about their autism. It's about what other people have done to them and how that's left them unwilling and unable in some cases to trust. And so when they come together in group, and it's very interesting because in the first 5 minutes of trying to get them to be vulnerable and discuss these places honestly and openly, they're wanting to goof off. They're wanting to go change the subject, go everywhere.
Right.
It's like trying to herd cats for the first 5 minutes or so. And then I let them do that and go astray for a while. And the way I bring them back is I start to pick them out singly in group and say, tell me about a time when. Mm-hmm. Right. And what happens is one of them will eventually be brave enough to share that space. And then 2 or 3 others in the group will say, yeah, I've been there. That really sucked. And then the bonding starts.
Right. So you're really creating your own sort of support group, similar to a 12-step program where I've been there too. We understand each other, and through that groupthink, heal together.
Absolutely. And I think that is the real power of any group, whether it's a therapy group or a 12-step group or whatever it is. It's that you are bringing together 10 people that can hold each other's emotional space and really bond through that.
Or the word that we use a lot is attune to one another.
Right, exactly.
So before we go, I have one last question for you, and it's a little bit different. I usually like to ask a final question to my guests, and the question I have for you is, you've been doing this work for quite a while. What do you think your work and how it's impacted you personally and the relationship that you're in? What has been the effect, or something that surprised you about it even?
Well, to be perfectly honest, I think in my relationship with my wife, it has challenged me in ways that I didn't know it was going to look at the way I'm acting in that relationship and improve a lot of my behaviors and take more time focusing on her and on my children. Because it's very hard for me to call out a client on things that they are doing that's damaging their relationship without recognizing the ways in which I might be doing that myself at times. Mm-hmm. So I think it's one of the blessings of this field that, I'm not in the room to be healed by my patient or by that interaction with my patient. Mm-hmm. But certainly there are issues there that after the session, I'll think, wow, this really plays out in my own relationship at times. And how am I handling that space myself?
Well, Robert, I really want to thank you for joining us on the Couples Expert Podcast. The work you shared about addiction, and I have to say, you just seem easy and personal and caring, and I think it's always nice to bring people on your show that can benefit the listeners and really make their life better. And I want to really reach out to all of you that if you're someone or know someone that has a problem in these areas in terms of addiction, this man is someone that I would like you to reach out to. His website is liferecoveryconsulting.com. Do you have a secondary website, Robert?
All of them feed into that one website. So,
Oh, okay.
you can get my podcast there too. Everything I have pretty much directs back to that website.
So seek out the help. There is help there. There are many programs, inpatient, outpatient programs. Everyone's situation is different. I do have a list of resources on my site, and Robert has been so gracious. We'll have a giveaway for him. If you go to the show notes, they will be there, and you can link. All his information is there. And I just want to thank all of you for coming. And please stay tuned next week, because next week we're going to have some great relationship advice. This is going to be one of the few podcasts that I'm going to do on my own, a solo one. And it's going to be how to really change your relationship from being a stale relationship like an old crust of bread and turn it into something exciting and passionate and loving. So tune in next week and we'll get you all freshened up. Take care and stay connected. Bye-bye.